This week on Influence, we're taking it to the streets, one subreddit at a time. Greetings, Netscape navigators and internet explorers. Welcome back to Influence with me, Matt Silverman, a person who's been covering internet culture, technology, communities, and social movements for, I'm going to say 400 years. It's at least 400 to 500. Who can say at this point? It's been a long time. As you may have heard last week, I recently found a computer that runs Windows 7, which has files on it from the beginning days when I was in media, and wow. It was funny to look at that time capsule because we were writing about things and covering things that were so adorable compared to what the internet is today. And especially what we're going to talk about today. We cover the promise of social media. We cover the creativity and the humor and the excitement and the community that these platforms give us and connect, and the ways in which it connects us. We cover the ways in which these platforms and companies and business models tear us apart. Relationships, communities, mental health, and dare I say, democracies. We have covered that extensively from a social, legal, creative point of view. And as I mentioned last week on last week's show, I suspect many folks listening share my feelings of powerlessness, of sadness, of I feel like I can't do anything or I can't do enough to participate in helping and fixing the serious crises that we are in at least in this country and in a variety of Western democracies that we are seeing. And then, dear listeners, I went to reddit.com where I am trying to avoid the news at all costs. I'm really trying to keep it tuned into video games and cat memes, just the basics. And then, of course, on r/pics, I start seeing hundreds, dare I say thousands of people gathering with the signs, with the banners, with the messages out in the freezing cold, at least here in New York and the Northeast, our neck of the woods, where protests are really starting. They're really starting to happen. And I was so relieved is an interesting word. I was so excited, empowered, scared, worried. What is happening? How can I participate? Where will this go? And what are the next steps? So did a little research, poked into, and there was a lot of discussion of like, hey, no one's covering this. There's thousands of people outside in Union Square. No one's covering it. Found some coverage on the New York Times and found that it was that there was connective tissue going on the internet, that there was an organization, perhaps a loose affiliation of organizations that are joining forces to finally, it feels slow but also really fast, mobilize a real and true protest, a real and true resistance to what is going on in our country. And I'm so excited that on very short notice, I was able to get in touch with these organizations and start a conversation with my guest this week, who is an activist and political organizer with 5051. We're going to explain what that nomenclature means in a minute because there's a lot to unpack in there. And she is also the director for an organization called Political Revolution. That is also something that we're going to talk about here. I am really, really excited to welcome Glo Sahay. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. She's going to correct me in one moment. Please welcome Glo to Influence. Hello.
Hi.
So glad to be talking with you today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. And it's Sahay.
Sahay, yes, which you told me, and I wrote it down, and okay. I'm writing it phonetically. So I want, as I told Glo before we started recording, listeners know I do stupid amount of research and really try to get as prepared as possible. And I think this came together yesterday. And so thank you
Mm-hmm.
for hopping on so quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks again for having me again.
It's very nice to meet you. And why don't you just share who you are, your background, and what you're working on right now?
Sure. So it really, for me as a individual, began with the Bernie Sanders campaign. So I was a young activist, around 22 years old, and I was actually organizing in Michigan for the Bernie Sanders campaign. His campaign was a true grassroots campaign in the sense that, he had a website and a Reddit where anyone could just jump in and get involved, kind of similar to how we're seeing some grassroots mobilization in this current this current movement. So that's how it began for me, and it continued on after his campaign. And I actually founded the group called Political Revolution, which is a non-connected PAC, which means that we're a political action committee not specifically affiliated with any party or candidate.
Okay.
And we established that.
Non-connected.
Yeah,
That's the term you used. Okay,
yeah,
and so that means not connected to a candidate or a party. Is that
correct.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we are all volunteers with no paid
Mm-hmm.
staff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a key aspect here, I think, into how this coalesced in our partnership with 5051, because
Mm-hmm.
5051 is also decentralized, all volunteer, no paid staff, with no intentions
Right.
to form like a
I
formal body
saw that
either.
on the website and
Mm-hmm.
coverage, that specifically the term non-professional, which makes sense, but I'd never really thought about that as like there are professional organizers and activists, and then there are the grassroots volunteers, as you said.
Yes.
Interesting.
Um, yes. So I've been doing a lot of online and in-person organizing for the last 8 years, and then got pulled into the whirlwind that is 5051
Hmm.
on like early February, basically, right before the first protest, which was February 5th.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
So, why don't you explain what 5051 stands for, what it is, and what's going on right now?
absolutely. So 5051 started with an idea also on Reddit, and it was seeded or planted by a person named Seth, who his Reddit username is Evolved Fungi, and he's been on Reddit for over a decade. And he specifically organizes in with decentralized movements. And his original idea was to have the 5051 stands for or means like having 50 protests in 50 states or capitals in one day. And the
Mm,
significance of the one day is kind of giving everybody one job. So
mm,
they're not focused on anything else but that one day, one protest. And
okay.
um, that worked really well as, I guess you can call it, as a fertilizer or fertile ground for this, obviously the civil unrest that we're seeing with the current events in America. It really laid the ground for that idea to spread very
Mm,
rapidly. And
hmm.
it allowed people to latch on to almost like a very simple task, without forming any formal hierarchy.
Yeah.
With grassroots movements and decentralization, it's very key that each individual and each group has autonomy.
Hmm.
And at the same time, everyone's working together towards one goal.
Yeah. To clarify, when I first saw 5051, I mistakenly got the impression that it was like, hey, what if we had 50 protests in 50 states at the same time on one day? But it sounds like it's more each protest is focusing on its own day. Is that more accurate, or is there a push toward a target day where it's going to be everywhere at all times?
Yeah, so the latter. It's a
Okay.
target for every state to be on the same page at the same day. So our first state was February 5th.
Yep.
And that was, I mean, I had just gotten in maybe 3 or 4 days prior, and I can speak to how we got involved. But yeah, it was like I was interviewed by USA Today the same morning, and I was like, maybe we'll see a few hundred. I don't think they ran that, because when I went to the Capitol here in Colorado, there was thousands of people, and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the media was scrambling, and that's why there was. I mean, there is coverage if you
yeah.
Google around, but it wasn't like
The cameras are not on the ground. Like
right.
I don't watch TV, and I definitely don't watch television news. But my perception is that people are annoyed that there's no camera crews out
Yeah,
there, right?
yeah.
Did you get all 50 states? Because I've seen the protest in a variety of cities, but I did not perceive it to be every single state on the
No,
5th.
it was every single state.
Amazing.
Some of them
That's
were really
amazing.
small, but like even Alaska, like
Amazing.
yeah,
Okay.
Hawaii. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So February 5th was the first day. What is happening now? Are protests continuing? Is there another target day for the next, what do we want to call it? Wave, or,
Yeah. So there actually was then another one on President's Day, which
That's the one I saw. That's the one
yeah,
that got a lot of the headlines, I think.
yeah, because I think a lot of people had the day off, and we branded
Mm-hmm.
it as like No King's Day,
No King's Day.
and then
Beautiful.
like literally the next day, what was it, yesterday or the day before? Like the days are blowing together for me, but Trump. Or they tweeted from the White House, like, long live the king, which is like,
Yes.
sure, it could refer to King
Cool.
of New York, but also, like, I don't know, it's very, I don't know, very interesting of them to tweet that. But,
Yeah. This wave is not a Nazi salute, but it looks like it, but it's probably not. This is,
yeah.
there's not a lot of nuance here with these people. So yes.
Yeah, so our next target date is March 4th for our mobilization.
My daughter's birthday. Happy birthday.
Congratulations.
It is the only date that is a sentence, a full sentence. And I don't know if this was intentional, but let's March 4th. Let's
Yeah.
March 4th on this day. That's beautiful. So what is I just don't know enough about political organizing. I've never been involved in that way. How do you, it seems insurmountable. It seems so big. Like, how did this all come together?
I honestly don't know. Like, I mean, I can speak to the specifics of how I think things happen, and this isn't the first time that these decentralized efforts have come around. And like I said, like I have the specific experience with the Bernie campaign, and I think some of the key elements are the autonomy and also the resources. Like, obviously, Bernie campaign was pre-COVID, but for
Right.
me, and I work in tech, so latching onto these tools and these messaging platforms like Slack and Discord, that really leveraged. It kind of changed the whole game on how organizing can take place, not only in the ground, but also sharing all these resources online. And so I learned a lot from that, and seeing. So when I got swept into 5051, it was like, I would say 90% of the communication was happening like on a Reddit and a Discord. And like, but it wasn't all the tools were very decentralized, which is the nature of this, but it helps to
Yeah.
have a little bit of centralization so people can say, oh, here's where I get my flyer. Here's where I get this, that, and the other thing. So
This is a very interesting time to be doing this, especially as it pertains to this show. I'm glad you're talking about this, because corporate-owned social media is a big part of the problem right now. We've talked about it a lot here. So the idea of a guest from 2 episodes ago made this beautiful analogy. Mallory Nodal was like, we are having public discourse on private property. And I was like, oh, yes, that's everything. So I'm a huge fan of Reddit and Discord. They're not the worst offenders by 1,000 miles. So it makes sense that it's happening there. But it is, you're bringing up an interesting point, which is that decentralized platforms and social media are here, but they're not they're not even close to being mainstream. So if you want thousands of people to get going, we're not quite there yet. So like, it sounds like it's a little bit of both. You're in both worlds still. And maybe that'll be different in 10 years, but right now we're still in both worlds.
Yeah. And not to neglect, like there are the most experienced organizers are on the ground, like doing everything word of mouth. And
Yes.
and there's a lot of power to that too. And but at the same time, we need those technological tools. So like, for example, like when we came in, we were like, okay, people need a central place to go to get all of their events. So we have an events website. It's events.pol-rev.com. So pol-rev.com. And that's where you can
I will link to everything that Glo is explaining in the show notes and the video description. So we will continue talking about websites and places to gather as we go. Please continue, Glo.
Yeah. So like, that's just one example. That's where everyone is putting 5051 official events is on that website. So
yep. There is a subreddit, a 5051 subreddit that is very active, and I've joined there to keep tabs on what's going on. So is it just these target days? Are people in the streets daily in major cities? What are you seeing right now?
Yeah, I would say like for those organizations that have been organizing for a long time. So PSL, which is the Party for Social Liberation, Indivisible, which is another post like Bernie org. They've all been organizing for like a decade or thereabouts. Oops, sorry. I'm getting a call, which is very loud.
Oh, hey.
Or loud in my ears.
Is it Bernie? Because we could bring him on the show.
Please. Yeah, no. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, so there's organizations that have been organizing on the ground, and like in an example in the Capitol in Colorado, like over the weekend leading up to President's Day, there were people occupying the Capitol, like not huge amounts, but like continuously occupying the Capitol. The key thing with our protests is like we are trying to mobilize a ton of people at once. So a lot of people have called for weekend dates, which we're kind of looking into that. And as we mentioned, we're looking into dates with certain amounts of significance. March 4th is the State of the Union.
Is that right? Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, great. This isn't just occurred to me. Weekends are times when people are off from work and they can get out. But I imagine people are maybe less inclined to watch the news, or the news coverage kind of slows down. So, like, is there a trade-off, or what does it look like in terms of awareness and participation in these days?
That's a good point. I think there is an aspect where people have to know where to tune in, and that's where like shows like yours really can come in handy, because it's like not everyone is on Reddit or Discord or this, that, or the other thing, and maybe they don't want to be, but all they need to know is what date and where am I going. So that's where the events website really comes into play here. And so and then there's also the main 5051 website, which is like all spelled out 5050.1. And that's where we'll be advertising those events that people can watch and find out about those dates. And maybe, as we continue on into this this presidential term, like we'll definitely be continuing to push for more dates that are further out to kind of build that message.
Yeah. It's a long road. We've got it's going to be a long 4 years. But like, I don't know. It's inspiring to see the momentum. It would be a shame for the momentum to peter out, which then it gets to my next question of like, wow, what do protests achieve? And
Mm.
I've been talking with friends who are civically minded and thinking about this stuff as well. And it's like, and I've seen a lot of discussion that's like, well, protesting drives awareness, but does it change hearts and minds? Does it change the actions of courts and lawmakers? And then there's another camp of people that's like, this stuff doesn't do anything unless you hit them in the pocketbook,
Mm.
where you boycott. Some people are calling for a general strike where everyone in the country would stop working, thus grinding the economy
Mm.
to a halt, which would then be like, oh shit, the Bezoses of the
Mm.
world would be like, hey, we got to do something about. So like, I know that's a huge question, but
Mm.
like, it's a big fat way to say, what do we want from these
Mm.
protests? What are the goals right now?
Yeah. So I see 5051 as a driver right now, and building community and moving towards that long-term action.
Hmm.
A lot of the people involved right now are very young. Like,
Hmm.
this is their first time organizing, and um, specifically, like, when you think of a protest, it's like, it's almost like the first thing you can do. It's like, show up and say, "Hey, I'm here. I don't
Yeah.
like this," and then you start talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
And then out of this movement has already come some new, like, local organizations. Like, I want to shout out, like, our Denver group. It's called Common Ground People's Collective, and it's
Okay.
a totally new group that just
Hmm.
formed out of this motion, that are really honing in and building their power locally. So that's like another message of this
I
movement,
love this. Okay.
is like, keep the power local, but then use the national brand as like a megaphone almost. And then I do want to stress, that these are like 100% peaceful protests. Like,
Yes.
there will be instigators,
Mm.
but we have been working within the um, the outlines of the law, in terms of making sure we pull permits if there's
Mm-hmm.
no permits required, making sure we're in public spaces, being
Mm-hmm.
civil, and everything like that. And I've even seen, we do shoot for, like, during the day between like 12 and 2 p.m. is generally when they start, but
Mm.
it is local, and it varies from state to state. But yeah, it's
The the more I learn about political action over the years, the more people tell me like it's all about the local. It's like it's your school board, it's your
yeah.
local, state congressperson, whatever. And so the fact that organizations are being born literally as we
Mm.
speak to mobilize that. And yeah, what you're saying is really powerful. Of like, you get on the ground and then suddenly you're part of a group, you're part of a network. So, like,
Mm.
you go from I'm just alone at my computer feeling angry to like I'm here with everyone, and that is profound.
Yeah.
It's cool. I've seen a lot of discussion again on Reddit of like people are sharing the photos, which is obviously so important, but then people are like, hey, you got to blur the faces of all these
Mm.
protesters because for safety. And I don't know what to make of that, because obviously it feels unsafe to be
Mm.
doing this sometimes. It feels
Mm.
worrisome given the political climate.
Mm.
On the other hand, if you take the emotion and the faces and the realness out of the what's going on in the street,
Mm.
you kind of take the teeth out of what these protests are about. And
Mm.
journalists would, I don't believe, would blur the faces. The New York Times did not blur anyone's face in their coverage. So I'm curious what you think about that personally. Are there
Mm.
policies in place around safety?
Yes, so we do have strong, like, cybersecurity or OPSEC, concerns, because we do live in a digital day and age, and we try to protect people from getting doxxed.
Yeah.
Um, which even I myself have had my information published, and so it's like, um, we are very cognizant of that, but obviously we can't prevent people from posting on their own social medias. And there is definitely a sense of like, well, when you see all these people together, it poses a powerful message. And I think specifically on, like you mentioned earlier, like these are public speaking rooms and private companies, like both
Mm-hmm.
Reddit and Discord. If you don't, like, for whatever reason, want your information subpoenaed or like are like concerned about that, like you should probably not post your photos. Like,
Yeah, right. Okay.
yeah, that's kind of,
Yes.
yeah.
That makes sense for the poster. But if you are in the street, it's if you don't want your face to be seen, don't go out in public. I'm not trying to put onus or blame on anyone. It's like
Mm.
this is what protesting is about. It's about stepping out, stepping
Mhm.
up, and being heard, I suppose.
Yeah, and we even, or a lot of people wear masks. So you see a lot of
Right.
protesters wearing masks or neck
Mm-hmm.
gaiters. We sell them on the Political
Yep.
Revolution website. Like,
Yep.
it is a huge concern for certain
In
people.
my neck of the woods, Republicans recently banned masks because
Mm.
wearing a mask might mean you could do crimes and not be identified. So
Mm.
that's fun. That's cool.
I think everybody has a right to their privacy, and we have a right to protest and a right to free speech.
Yep.
So if you don't want your face to be seen, just wear a mask or a neck
That is
gaiter.
your that is your privilege.
Mm.
This seems like we said, it's been a long month and change since January 20th, whenever inauguration was. It's been a long, hard, cold couple of weeks here. So it felt like it took forever for like heroes to step up and start pushing back. But actually, this is so fast, right? The mobilization is
Mm.
crazy fast considering how large it is and
Mm.
how quickly, right? I mean, given
Mm-hmm.
your long experience with this
Mm.
work, do you feel like there's a huge momentum here, or is it kind of like the usual pace?
No, no, this is huge. I mean, like, we went from one day, like the Friday before the February 5th, like we were talking like in our own group. We were like, we don't know who these are organized by. We don't know if we're
Hmm.
going to back it. Like, we saw like the
Oh,
5051
interesting.
subreddit started. It was like 30K like
Hmm.
subscribers like the weekend before. And then that Monday is when we got pulled in and we announced our partnership with 5051, which, even though, like, I don't think the public sphere maybe had known about us, we did have a lot of backing online.
Hmm.
And so people were like, oh, wow, like it lended a little bit of legitimacy to that, because a lot of people were concerned, like, I don't know, there's just a lot of concern around like who's organizing this, like what
Yeah.
is this? And
No,
then,
that's valid. I mean, and
yeah.
even as a like, I don't pretend to be a journalist, but when I do shows like this, I'm like, are these people legit? Like, I got to make sure
Mm,
that this is all
yeah.
on the up and up. I don't want, I've had rare experiences where, we'll bring guests onto other shows that I've worked on. They're like, hey, the vaccines are no good. I'm like, whoa, 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 what the fuck?
Yeah.
So anyway, yes. So you vetted and sort of sniffed out where this was all coming from and then figured out, okay, wait, hey, this is legit. This is really happening.
Yeah. It wasn't so much as vetted as like we became part of it too.
Join
Like,
forces.
we were like, oh, this is a bunch of real people. Like, this is a true grassroots movement. This is
Yeah.
like, we had experienced this before. And there are true organizers that have been organizing since Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives
Right.
Matter, at the front lines of like those movements. And I want to shout out my partner, Sarah, who is the executive director of Voices of Florida Fund.
Hmm.
She has been instrumental in kind of building power. That's her expertise, and organizing locally. So we're a very good pair of like her having that experience with ground organizing, and then me having like the online kind of presence. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I believe Sarah was quoted in the New York Times
yeah.
piece, and she was very kind in connecting you and I. So
Mm-hmm.
shout out to Sarah. Um, You mentioned Occupy and other movements. Man, my memory of Occupy was like, because I'm in New York, like they were camped out for months. They were
Mm-hmm.
there. They were really, really there, really doing the work.
Yeah.
And it was covered all the time, constantly. And then, the stock market imploded, and then we were like, oh no. And then
Mm-hmm.
Congress just rolled back all the protections and made it a casino again. Like, I'm not saying protesting doesn't work or isn't important, but it's hard to not be demoralized where it
Mm-hmm.
just goes back to the status quo after everyone
Mm-hmm.
really camped out and really marched and all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. So like, I don't know. What do any thoughts on that, on the legacy of modern protesting?
Yes. So organizing is a key aspect to this. One thing that I say about political revolution and just organizing in general is like there's some people that, or there's always like 10 people that can do 10,000 things, and then 10,000 people that only have to do one thing. So
Hmm.
those 10 people at the core, or whatever you want to call it, they're helping to do the 10,000 things so that everybody else just has to show up and do that action, whatever that action is. And that's like
That's really
such
cool.
that's such a key component of 5051 being that megaphone, because like another thing is we really are stressing autonomy. So like for example, this March 4th, we call them days of action. So
Hmm.
like if people want to protest, they can do that. If people want to boycott, if people aren't
Hmm.
able to show up in person, we also have a ton of ways to get involved online. We
Yeah.
have graphic designers,
Hmm.
writers, we need lawyers. If you're a lawyer, hit me up.
Yeah.
No, but
Yep.
yeah. So
I
there.
really like that. Okay, this is, and we will link to all this, and I'm going to be checking it out too. Is like, yeah, I'd like to get out and in the street at some point and be part of it, but I also, have digital media skills that hopefully would be useful to a movement like this, and I'd like to contribute that from my computer rather than,
Yeah.
because like, I don't know, not to be an elderly person, but like, if you're 20 something and you're going to school or you have a flexible life, you can just go. But like, we have kids and bills to pay, and like, so there's things are complicated in terms of political action for different people at different stages of their life, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully the internet lets us get involved in ways that maybe we couldn't 10 or so years ago.
Exactly.
um, well, why don't we take a pause here? We do have to take a break. We have to thank the Patreon members, but first I must quiz you with our court-mandated trivia segment about the history of protests in this country. Are you prepared to be stumped?
Yes. Is that
She's
me?
thinking.
Sorry, I didn't know if that was for the listeners or me.
Well, look, the listeners are here, but you're the only one here. You're about to be grilled. Today we're talking about, of course, peaceful protests that hopefully enact change in our country. Something that regular people can do, as we've been seeing in the streets and as Glo's been talking about. But sometimes celebrities can do it too. They're just like us, Glo, the celebs. One actor in particular is very passionate about causes like the climate crisis, nuclear proliferation, anti-war, seal poaching, labor abuses, and many more. In fact, this actor is so passionate about these causes that he has been arrested for protesting more than 66 times throughout his career, earning him the nickname the most arrested man in Hollywood, which, given all the shit that goes down in Hollywood, that's saying something. So your question today, who is this very famous person who has taken part in so many nonviolent protests over the years that he's been arrested 66, probably more times by now? I have 3 choices for you.
Okay.
Are you prepared?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. She seems a little nervous.
I'm apprehensive.
Yeah. How plugged into like actors and Hollywood culture are you?
Not very much.
Nor am I, but
yeah.
you might be able to sniff out the right answer here.
Okay.
Is it A, the president we wish we had, Martin Sheen, famous for his performances in The West Wing, Apocalypse Now, Wall Street, and the Netflix show Grace and Frankie? That is choice A. Is it B, Sean Penn from Mystic River, Milk, Dead Man Walking, Fast Times at Ridgemont High? Or is it C, Leonardo DiCaprio, who is best known, of course, for Titanic, Wolf of Wall Street, The Aviator, and many more? Now, you may be aware all of these actors are definitely very engaged with social and political causes, but only one of them has been arrested 66 times. Do you have a guess, a thought process here?
Wow, I wouldn't have guessed any of those names, but maybe Martin Sheen.
Okay. Any reasoning there? Any gut feeling?
Just because he does have those social, political kind of themes to his movies, but I honestly, if you had told me this, I would not have honestly known this.
All right. Glo goes with Martin Sheen. We will find out if she is correct right after this important break. You know what time it is. That's right. It's not 2:30. That's when I go to the dentist. But it is time, of course, to thank everyone who supports the show on Patreon. That is patreon.com/influencepod, including the executive producers at the $10 or more tier who support the show every single month, including Dominic Kerr, William, Duran, and of course, Bowie Barks. Thank you for making this show possible. And, much like the protests we're covering here, it's been a grassroots effort over the years and in this new incarnation. So thank you very much for the support at any tier. And now it's time to see if Glo got the trivia question correct. We're back with Glo, political organizer and activist, talking about 5051. And links are in the show notes, of course, but it's 50501. So it's 50 states, 50 states.
50 protests, 50 states, one day.
I'm like, it's protests, right? Okay. 50 protests, 50 states, one day. 50501.one is the website. Or 5050.one. And we'll link to that in the show notes. Before we continue our conversation here, we got to find out who is the most arrested man in Hollywood. One of these actors, very famous actors, has been arrested more than 66 times for protesting climate and nuclear proliferation, anti-war protests over the years. Glo went with A, Martin Sheen. Your other choices were Sean Penn and Leonardo DiCaprio, all very politically active, famous faces. I always give guests a chance to change their answer after the break. Have you reconsidered, or are you sticking with Mr. Sheen?
I think it's A or B, but
okay.
I don't know. If it's Leo, I'll be so surprised, but I'll say
Glo sticks with Martin Sheen. I am thrilled to inform you that you are correct. Martin Sheen is the most arrested man in Hollywood. Just gets taken away in handcuffs over and over again. And then because he's a famous white guy, they're like, okay, you're good. And then he just gets back at it again, even into his 60s. He's probably in his 70s now. I believe he's still very politically active. So good job, Mr. Sheen. I hope maybe you'll meet him at one of the 50/50s one of these days.
Don't know.
As we wrap up here, I've been thinking a lot about, two things. You touched on it earlier. Is there an economic component of this? Are some of these protests going to be like, hey, don't buy things from Amazon. Hey, don't use Facebook and what does that look like? Or does it need to be a general strike, which is like everybody stops, everybody shuts down? Like what's percolating for that sort of stuff?
The boycott stuff is 100% something that many activists and online organizers talk about, and it's not easy for everyone though. Like for example, if you live in a rural area, or like you might just have like one Walmart where you can get everything, like your one superstore. But generally, we encourage people buy locally. Don't shop at the Kroger brands, Target, Walmart. If you can avoid it, and keep all your money locally, shop at local farmers markets, local grocers. There's even local pharmacists. People may not know this, but there
Yeah.
are other pharmacy options other than like Walgreens and CVS and all that fun
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where people can start. But sometimes it can also be more expensive that way too. So um, we really do need a total reform in terms of our, economic and governmental structure that allows people to be able to make consumer choices without, putting, money back into the pockets of millionaires and billionaires, or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
It makes me think about, and I'm not a historian, I'm not an expert, and I'm not the most well-read person about Martin Luther King Jr. But as this hellscape was taking shape, I'm like, we need the MLK of our time to be the inspirational person. And then it made me think about the bus boycotts in Alabama, where it's like MLK was giving speeches and rallying and churches and community. But to my understanding, it wasn't until the entire, like, not the entire, a huge proportion of the Black community in the South was like, we're no longer going to ride the bus because of Jim Crow. And that, like, almost put corporations out of business. And only then did government be like, whoa, 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 we got to figure this out. You know what I mean? And I just, I don't know who that person or people is going to be. We don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
And B, I don't know what that looks like. What a boycott looks like in 2025, because it's all capitalism is everywhere, everything. I don't know. It's not I'm sorry, that's a very broad question, but
Yeah. I'll try to break it down a little bit. Like first, Reverend, Martin Luther King Jr. was so powerful. Well, first of all, he was an orator and
yeah.
he knew how to speak to a large group of people. I don't know that we'll have like the exact element of him again, or maybe it'll be multiple people. But the key thing, and this is kind of an educational thing, like when you talk about radical nonviolence and you talk about the way Black people have been oppressed in this country, like the instinct is always, just from a human standpoint, is eye for an eye. So to convince an extremely oppressed people to say like, hey, this is just going to get you even more oppressed. Like, we need to stand together. We need to do extremely peaceful. That's why it's called radical nonviolence, because it's choosing to be nonviolent in the face of severe systemic oppression. And
which is really, really hard.
It's extremely powerful. I mean, that's why, his legacy has moved to this day. And I would stress people to really educate themselves on the civil rights era, to understand how we got to where we are today, and how there are elements that are being repeated and that we can continue to learn from and employ. And that's why we stress, also, and have that as a core value of our protest, is having that nonviolent, peaceful aspect, because that's just one of our core values. And, people may say like, oh, well, as you've been, kind of questioning or framing, like, well, will this protest ultimately do anything? And the answer is yes, because it builds community, it builds local power, and ultimately it will activate people out of their, it takes people out of their comfort zone a little bit. I think that's one of the main things about consumer capitalism, is like, it keeps us in our comfort zones. And it's not anyone's fault. It's literally, sorry, this is getting a little bit intellectual, but it's like,
hey, I'm here for it. That's what I love. Keep it up.
It's literally those like dopamine fueled like feedback cycles that keep us in our phones and our homes and our safety zones. But if people really want change, like, I would say keep it simple. Just do the one thing. Like, if you found the 5051 megaphone online, like, do show up. And there's a ton of different ways you can support. If you can't show up, we'll put you to work online too. And it, it's really, And that's actually been my expertise with political revolution. Like, I've been doing this for 8 years. Like, it's a marathon, not a sprint,
Mm.
is what we keep telling people. There's a ton of energy here, but we're actually doing things like burnout management sessions. I'm actually holding one on Sunday to have like a little
Hmm.
webinar to teach people how to actually keep themselves at a pace without constantly like,
Ah, that's so
yeah,
important and
yeah,
so, I don't know, so easily overlooked, but giving people who are engaged and have that momentum tools and practices to take care of themselves as they
yeah,
go, because like, yeah, it's a long haul. Um, yeah, no, I love what you're saying, and I'm not not to get too nerdy. I'm not like a necessarily a literature guy, but read some Brave New World, some Aldous Huxley, because 1984 is the book that everyone's like, the oppressors and the government, and it's like, no, Brave New World is showing that corporations gave the masses endless entertainment and drugs, and that's how they keep them controlled, politically controlled. And that vision of a dystopia is literally what we're in now. And there are lessons from history and literature and such that you just so eloquently outlined.
yeah,
Um, and as we wrap up, you alluded to this as well, but um, what can or an individual listener do next or immediately? Obviously, you're
yeah,
saying go to the website, and what is the most valuable thing to this movement? Donation, time, skill, going out into the
yeah.
street at the appointed time. What do you recommend for newbies,
Yeah.
novices like myself?
So if you want to attend a protest in the future, we will be announcing more dates besides the 4th. That would be where you would go to, and it's all spelled out. So like 5050.1, not the numbers, but like letters 5050.1.
Yes.
That's where you can find the events. If you want to look at electoral reform, that's where
Mm,
political revolution comes into play. So that's
okay.
our website. We also have two other affiliates. We have No Voices Unheard,
Mm,
which is nvunheard.org. They are a group that specifically has resource kits for local organizing and protesting, like in the community.
hmm.
And then there's also buildtheresistance.org, which is another resource hub for like kind of linking all of these different resource kits together. So, and all of these are like co-linked on each other's websites. So,
Yes.
like if you go to 5050.1, you'll see all the links to all the partners and affiliates there. So,
Beautiful. All right. I'm going to put every link that Glo just explained in the show notes, and obviously they're all linked together. So if you are inspired, as I am, by this work, you can go there and just at least get a starting point or a resource to I don't know, get involved. Glo Sahay, did I get it?
yep.
Yes. Glo Sahay, thank you so very much for being my guest. This is really helpful, and it makes me feel more positive, and keep up the great work. We're counting on you and your colleagues for all of this.
Thank you for having me.
It's so easy to feel bad. It's so easy to feel hopeless and down and bummed and powerless, as I said at the top of the show. But I'm feeling pretty good. Feeling good about the power of organization. I really like that just participating, just showing up is this gateway to a network. It's so powerful. It's, on one hand, it's so obvious, but on the other hand, especially as a person who works from home, who is very isolated for a lot of the day, there is something very profound about being with the community, being with the activism, the people in that activist circle, and seeing them doing the work and being like, we can actually do it. And as Glo said, it can be slow. It has to be rigorous. It has to be ongoing. And we have to take care of ourselves and each other as we proceed. So As we said many times, every single link we talked about, every way to get involved, every way to contribute, every way to get information about where the protests are happening in your city will be in the show notes and video description of this very podcast. So I do implore you to pop in there and at least check it out, if not participate. While you're in the doobly-doo, perhaps join our listening community, Discord, email, patreon.com/influencepod, where you can get ad-free versions of the show and you can get thanked on the airwaves. That's how this gets distributed. For now, while you're doing all that, please remember to be kind and rewind your podcast after listening, and I will talk with you in 1 week's time.